Hello, my name is Garegin Nalbandian. I'm one of the founding members of the Geopolitical Club, and I have Mr. Adel Bashqawi, a Circassian activist and honorable member of the Geopolitical Club Circassian desk with us, as well as Mr. Ali Berseg, who is also a Circassian activist, one of the founding members or one of the founders of the Geopolitical Club. Ali, I see that you have guests. Please introduce your guests.
Yes. Hello, Garegin.
Hello.
We have a friend here, discourse. Chen, Bram. Zack, please.
Sure.
Me to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Ali. My name is Zack Barsik from the Circassian Institute, working with Ali and Adel on Circassian affairs, specifically on the genocide recognition and the importance of genocide recognition. And we have a very honored guest today, Chen Bram. He is a visiting scholar from Hebrew University in Israel. He's right now doing teaching courses at the Strassler Center at Clark University, a center that specifically does research on Holocaust and genocide studies. He has been engaged with Circassians for the last 20 years, I would say, of his life. He's an anthropologist by study, but he's very interested on the crossways between different ethnic groups and religious groups who have shared experiences among our history. Chen traveled to the Caucasus extensively for a few years, and now we are very fortunate to have him here in Boston, where when he comes to visit us in New Jersey, it becomes a very important session for us. So we were very fortunate to have him today to be with you and with the audience of Geopolitical.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
And so we are doing an interview on the eve of the 21st of May, the Circassian National Memorial Day. I would like to ask you to please tell us more about the significance of the May 21st in the Circassian culture and in the Circassian nation.
Please, Adel, if you could start.
Okay, thank you for asking. I welcome all our guests and thank you for the invitation to allow us to be on your show on the eve of the 21st of May, which is the commemoration of the Circassian genocide. I would like to start with reminding all the audience and the people who are in the academic work of the Caucasus about what happened to many of the Caucasian nations, especially the Circassian nation. The Circassian nation had to go through 101 years against the Russian greed and aggression, which took from 1763 to 1864, that made Circassians go through many difficulties. Half of them were killed. The rest, after that long time, had to be displaced either away from their original homeland towards the Koban basin, which is the basin of the River Koban, or the rest will be or went and had to be deported to the Ottoman Empire, and later on to be dispersed to tens of countries after the 1900 end of colonization, when many states were established and so many countries had hosted the Circassians, which they might count up to 40 or 50 countries of the world. Now, the Circassians had to go through this as victims. They did not victimize themselves, or they are not having a self-victimizing or fabrication information. All of this information and data about the Circassian genocide and the crimes committed against the Circassians are already established in the Russian documents and were reported by many authors and many writers who went deep in the stories were invented by the Russians, and had to come up with a true result, which showed that most of the Russian stories were wrong, and the Circassians were victims, actual victims. It's not fabrication, and they had to live with it till today. 90% of the Circassians right now, they are not living in their homeland. Only 10% of them living at homeland in 6 different areas. The people who are 90% who are in diaspora, they will not be able to go back and live there on their soil. And they are denied their freedom. They are denied the right of living in their own homeland, and they are denied of basically their independence. They had to be given the right, like any other nation in the world, and to be able to explain to the world about the truth and justice that needs to be given to this nation, and to be given the rights like any other dignified nation.
Ali Jan, would you like to add anything? Mr. Barsik?
Please, Ali.
Would you like to add anything?
Yes, sure. I would like to add to Adel Bashqawi narrative on my side. Circassians lost not only, of course, we lost a lot of people in this genocide. But what is most, how would I say, grave, what happened to us, we were eliminated from the history. Our country was always on the maps since early
1300s.
Early medieval time. The world was known about that. Sailors knew about Asia. Our country was on the map, and our people, the nation was numerous, and all this stopped at one point in the history. Not only stopped, but the whole history, the whole information was taken away and converted into falsehood about us, about the people who live there, you know. President Putin, one of the examples. President Putin, in his public speech, stated that indigenous people of the Sochi area are ancient Greeks.
Wow.
How should we understand this kind of statement? They committed genocide, they killed the people, and they say that they never lived there. So this kind of thing is not supposed to be tolerated, and we have to speak out and say as much as we can. It's not only this; it's a whole complex. We are the culture, the archaeological culture, the everything which belongs to Circassians is converted into some sort of a wrong way. You know, people know recategorized, yes, and basically it's all done in order to cover this crime, in order to make it hidden, in order to make it to make us look how would I say it?
Disconnected, yes.
Disconnected, yes, exactly. That's the term. Disconnected from the land. Like we never had the land, we never had the history, we never had anything. And the situation where we are now, the majority of our 90% outside the country, live in Turkey, in the Middle East. Middle East is a problem which touched a lot of people. Syria, we know now the crisis in Syria is
Heartbreaking.
Is terrible, and people can't return. They have no right to return.
Finally, if I can point out something for May 21. May 21, Gregorian, we bring up the history. We bring up a lot of that, but we always try to bring this as a collective for all the Circassians around the world, all the Adels around the world, to also discuss what we're going through today. We don't see this as a genocide that's completed in 1864. We see this as a continual genocide till today. I'll give you an example. Imagine now in countries, in Turkey, will they continue to put up Turkish generals who committed the genocide against Armenians? Would they stop that? Would that be a big outcry for our brothers, the Armenians? That would be a challenge. For us, We're seeing memorials till today, being erected throughout the Caucasus with imperial symbols of saying that we've now continued and still occupying Circassia. That's only one example of the continual genocide. Another example would be the right of return. No Circassian has a right of return. We go in as tourists into our own land. And if they like us, they let us stay. If they don't like us, they kick us out. Just today, we found out a mother pleading on the internet why her son is being kicked out when we tried to return back from Syria. So there is many cases like this happening of this continual genocide. And then one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is we are finding out that the Russians are specifically pointing out that the diaspora is not part of the homeland, our compatriots. So 6 million Circassians are not considered as Edigas to the Russians. We are considered as people assimilated into Turkey, Middle East, Europe, and America. This is a challenge for us because we still speak the same language. We have our relatives inside there. We communicate with them on a daily basis, but the Russians try to keep us disconnected from our own homeland. So there's multiple things or multiple policies that Russia is continuing today to have this continual genocide against us. And May 21 is that day we come together to discuss this historically and the live points of what we're experiencing today.
Thank you. Chen, would you like to add anything?
I think it is an interesting process that we see, I would say, in the last between 10 to 15 years. The rise of this consciousness of the centrality of this memory of the Circassian genocide. Now, from a more scholarly point of view, I would say that the discussion of the Circassian genocide is not something new only for these 12 years. Already in the beginning of the 1990s, in conferences in Caucasus, international conferences with delegates from all over the Circassian diaspora and also the communities in Caucasus, people were talking also about the need for recognition for Circassian genocide. But this was only one point among other points. And at that time in the 90s, I would say that the activists of that time of the Circassian ethno-national movement were trying somehow to get to some understanding with the Russian Federation to some kind of a way to somehow fulfill their national aims in cooperation with the Russian Federation. I would say in a peaceful manner.
Reconciliation.
A kind of reconciliation, Zack say here, and I agree with him. But then what we see is that since the, I would say 2002, 2003, and then even more 2005, these activists, the people who are standing near me here and others, also in Israel, my homeland, but all around, they actually found themselves talking to the walls. They found themselves in a situation where the genocide discourse remained the only discourse for them to go on with their identity, with their claims for their motherland. So there's clearly issues here of policy and a question mark whether there could be some kind of reconciliation, some kind of peaceful way that people will feel that their national
Identity.
their identity, their national identity, their collective identity, we can even say, can somehow find some answers. And without this, what we see is that the discourse of genocide became very, very central. It's not new, of course. The discourse is not new, but the centrality is a new phenomenon.
Thank you. May I just add, as much as I don't want to use the term Krasnodar Krai, but just for the sake of, so that people could locate where Circassia is, as far as geographically, the geographical location, because Krasnodar comes from the word krasny, which is basically, it means red, which is the color of blood. In this case, it's representing the Circassian blood and the victims of the Circassian genocide. And so, Ali and Zack, you mentioned that Russian Federation is doing everything they can possibly do in order to erase the traces of Circassians. Of course, they are saying that Sochi was an ancient Greek settlement, which is not true. And it happens a lot. Even the Turks always bring up, they try to erase anything and everything that has Armenian writings, or anything and everything that ties lands in Azerbaijan Republic or in Turkey that ties to Armenians. They try to erase everything, including the graves and cemeteries, famous historical sites, and that's their politics. Basically, what happens is anytime superpowers such as Russia, Turkey, when they decide to expand their imperial borders, they do it on the count of other nationalities, other ethnic groups who happen to be on that on their way. And the way they do it, unfortunately, they call it deportations. However, we all know what deportations means is loss of lives, people being deported. They are being subjected to tortures and killings and rape and anything and everything horrible. You mentioned something about Syria. Unfortunately, not only Syria, we witnessed ethnic cleansings in Chechnya. Right now, the Azerbaijan Republic is forcing the Lezgins out of their homes, and they're telling them, hey, go live somewhere else. This is Azeri land, when they're in fact invaders. They weren't there, and suddenly, because of the border changes of the superpowers, they decided to form a Republic of Azerbaijan. And we see this, it's very unfortunate, but we do see this, and innocent people do suffer because they happen to be geographically located on those borderlines that those big players decided to play with. And so that brings us up to my next question. My next question is, knowing what we know, how can we bring more recognition to the genocides and what's happening, the ethnic cleansings, in order to prevent present and future genocides? So what I'm saying is, how do we bring more attention to past genocides and current genocides in order to prevent current and future genocides from taking place? Do you have anything that you may want to share? Ideas?
I think this is Zack. I think one important step is what we're doing today. As you know, many players in the Russian officials have in the past tried to use the so-called Armenians were active against the genocide of Circassians. The Circassians were active in the genocide against Armenians. This year, we have to look at as a ploy. Yes, there was some individuals, some roles, but there's also sides of the opposite, where there was assistance as well. There was protection as well.
True.
We need to have this discussion, so when we have it, it will clarify. This is a serious blow to Russia right now, just us sitting here and being able to have this discussion, because if we have this, it will find, we can find solutions. We can find ways to support each other's initiatives, to support each other's concerns. That's the most important, I think.
Thank you. Alijan, if you remember, a couple of years ago, there was a situation where Russians were trying to deport Armenians from Circassian lands, and you wrote an article about that, explaining that Armenians have, you know, every right or more right compared to Russians to be in Circassia. And we are good, in good neighborly relations, obviously. And so thank you for that. I just wanted to bring it up that we did not forget about that. And like Zack mentioned, yes, there were situations where Armenian individuals and Circassian individuals did participate in the acts of the Ottoman Empire or the Russian Empire. But the fact that we need to look at is no Armenian with the Armenian flag went to kill Circassians, and no Circassian with a Circassian flag went to kill Armenians. That was just individuals in the service of Turkey or individuals in the service of the Russian Federation. It does not represent the actual nation of Circassia or the nation of Armenians. And so that's something that we need to clear so that more people can understand what really happened and how did Armenians end up in Circassian lands, and how did Circassians end up in our Western Armenian lands. Which brings up to the same discussion, like, I mean, we need to do more educative programs such as this one and in the future in order to educate the masses, and so people can understand what really happened historically. And it was not like we intentionally went to Circassia. Why would we do that when we have our own homeland? Or why would you be not in your homeland unless you were forced to leave? Otherwise you would have been killed. These are the important topics to talk about it, and it requires consistency in educating everyone so it doesn't happen again. Now, I want to mention that I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I may say something, sure. It was a very important discussion we had a couple weeks ago with Professor Chen, and like you said, we're seeing in places of institutes, the thought, the process is changing. There is now research being done in that realm of how to reframe, how to a new narrative that's coming out with more support of historical documents. So I'd like to ask if Chen can tell us a little bit about that professor from Turkey, what she's doing.
Right. I gave a course, and it was a graduate course in Clark University this semester, and we discussed different atrocities in the Caucasus. And then one of my students, this student is studying the Armenian genocide. And interestingly, the student is Turkish. But a Turkish student, a PhD student who is really want to study the history in depth and understand the recognition of the Armenian genocide. And this student decided, together with me, to look more carefully about the Circassian and the Armenian genocide. And so I think one thing this student found, and I'm not giving the name now because I didn't coordinate it, but hopefully the student will write it. Maybe we will write it together. Is the complexity of the situation. Clearly, as you already stated, that there were high officials, Circassians, who were part of the Turkish regime and took part in these atrocities. However, we can see also some examples of Circassians who clearly also assisted Armenians. And some of them even mentioned that since they remember themselves as children, hearing about the suffer of their parents during these atrocities or genocide or in Caucasus, they cannot see the Armenians in the same situation. Now, if we go from here to a more universal lesson, I think we should admit that whatever nation, it doesn't matter what nation, and I'm not excluding my own nation from this, any nation that went through atrocities and even genocide, they can find themselves after some generations in a situation where they somehow can be also part of a situation of genocidal violence. And the question, of course, how do they react? How do they react? Where do they position themselves? How do they understand the past? This is something that we can teach. We can make people understand these difficulties and these complexities. And my aim is that this will, of course, impact the relations of Armenians and Circassians, but let me add that I hope it will impact also the relations as for violence, not necessarily genocide. I think genocide is a harsh word. Yes, we use it in these terms of Armenia, of course, of Armenians. We understand that it is relevant for Circassian history. But as for violence today, as for conflicts today, we should remember that how to take these past experiences and transform them to more alternative thinking about violence also for other conflicts. And this is apply also for the Middle East, of course, Syria, but also the Israeli-Palestinians and also Armenia and Azerbaijan. So that's my hope here as a scholar and as a person.
Thank you. It's very unfortunate, and I want to also add the Kurds. 100 years after the Armenian genocide, the Kurds are being, and the Yazidi nations, they are being subjected to genocides. And let's not forget that during the years of the Armenian genocide, at the same time, 750,000 to approximately 1 million Assyrians were killed, as well as probably around 2 million or so Greeks were killed. And so, I mean, this program is to bring awareness, if not anything else, that these genocides did take place because of hate crimes, because of discrimination, because of fascism, and we want this to stop because it's inhumane. It doesn't. I mean, it should be considered as a war crime, and it should be punishable by international laws. And the denial of genocides, just like my Circassian counterparts stated, Russian Federation is denying that genocide ever took place. They're saying it was a war. The same way the Turks are saying it was a war between the Turks and the Armenians. How is it a war when one side is a regular army and the other side is just unarmed people? How is it a war when the soldiers are killing unarmed people? It's not a war, it's a planned ethnic cleansing. And so, just for the record, the Geopolitical Club, we have recognized both the Circassian genocide and the Armenian genocide. And we want to bring awareness, and we want to make it at the level where it's at national level, basically, so that more Armenians and more Circassians are aware of it, and we understand and we feel each other's pain, because the last result is it's humans who are being killed and suffering and starving and basically being treated worse than animals. I'm not saying that animals should be treated bad, but it's just, it should stop, and there should be no excuse for that kind of violence. And so with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit more about the Geopolitical Club, our spheres of interest, and how we work on collective security for the region, because each of us is unable to break free from the foreign rulers, the current foreign rulers in the region, the superpowers, which at this point are Russia and Turkey, and it's, you know, they want to control the region. And the new trend which is coming up between Europe and the sanctions have been lifted from Iran. So Iran and Europe want to use that geographical area, Caucasus, the Trans-Caucasus or the Armenian highland, to connect with Iran. And imagine the multi-billion, possibly the number is going to be in trillions, dollars of trade, goods and services being transported from Europe to Iran. And with that, things are changing. And so when that takes place, Russia and Turkey economically and politically will have to leave the region. Would you like to comment anything about that, and what is your point of view? Do you like the current situation? Are you optimistic about what the future will bring with Iran and Europe trading, and Caucasus and Trans-Caucasus, the Armenian highlands being the connecting points of their trade and goods and services?
The question is our opinion of what we're looking, or our feedback of the Trans-Armenia, where the trade is coming from Iran to Europe. What kind of feedback? Is that the question you're asking?
Correct. It's a new trend that is taking place, that basically the sanctions have been lifted off Iran, and Europe is trying to get goods and services from Iran, and all that transfer of wealth is going to go through the Trans-Caucasus and Caucasus to Ukraine. That's basically why the war in Ukraine is taking place, and that's why Russia is pushing the issue of resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh conflict in order to put more Russian soldiers, peacekeepers, in the region, and in order to stay in control of the current political and economic situation in our region. I mean, are you optimistic about the new possible changes, or is it, I mean, change is difficult to accept, but sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be not so good. What are your views about that?
With the trend going on these days, with the possibility of isolating Iran for a reason or another, I think the two only sides that will be benefiting out of such economic boost in the area are Turkey and Russia, because they are close to Iran. They don't need to get there, to go a long distance. And you can say that they have even adjacent boundaries with Iran, and all the benefits they will take it. In that effect, I would say that the Caucasus area will stay as is. Probably the Ukraine problem will even erupt more, and the Russians seemingly will not give up on Ukraine, or even just to keep the area unstable. All of these, of course, depend on other developments in other areas. Like everybody wants his share from the cake. China wants Europe and so on. But we come back, if there are sanctions against Iran in a way or another, whether through the United Nations or without the adjacent countries will be the beneficiaries of that.
Thank you. And so I'm sure that, I mean, Ali, you're involved in a committee of a geopolitical club that is working on creating a collective security for the region, because we all understand that each of us, individual nations, is unable to break free from the foreign rulers, the current foreign rulers that we have in the region on our own. But we can do it by working together, and for that we need to leave our differences that imperial powers have created in order to divide and conquer the different nations in the region. And we need to focus on how we can live and thrive together as neighbors, as allies, and as brothers and sisters. What are your views on that?
Right now, we live through very, very turbulent period of time when Russia faces a lot of troubles in economics, in political issues. There's wars in Ukraine. They launched war against Ukraine. They launched war. They stepped in the war in Syria. So it's not gonna end up very, very well for Russia, and it might happen very soon. We Circassians are the minority in our land, in Circassia, particularly in the western part, which is so-called Krasnodarsky Krai. Krasnodar, by the way, you mentioned Krasnodar was named after Russian. I would like to correct you. It was originally named Yekaterinodar. Catherine the Great, she granted land to Kazakhs, and then Bolshevik communists came and they changed the name, so they called it Krasnodar.
So it's based on the Krasny as of the Bolshevik. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
On Circassian blood to make justice to Russians, we have to notice that. So, come back to the point. Armenians are in a very significant number, residing particularly in the western areas of Circassia. And it's very important for us, for Circassian people worldwide, for millions of us, to know that people who now live physically on our ancestral lands, which were abandoned by the nation, by the indigenous nation, by Adel nation.
Well, let's not say abandoned. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's not say abandoned, but your people were forced out by the Russian soldiers, and so you had really no choice but to leave or stay there and die. And so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's very important for us that Armenians actually live there right now, stand on our side in the case of genocide. I know that every nation has different segments of or different groups who would share or wouldn't share, but our role and our target is to bring awareness upon those people who live there, so that they understand that Circassians are the ones who used to live there, and they are the ones who planning in the future to come back and repatriate and settle in their land, which is not allowed right now, but in the future, because times changes and every situation is going to change. Russia, whole regime, Putin's regime is going to collapse very, very soon, hopefully for Russians and for us and for Armenians, for all the world. We want to be Armenians on our side. Armenians are 15% in Krasnodarsky Krai, as far as we know. They predominantly living along the Black Sea coast, but also in the Petigorsk area. That article you mentioned before, yes, I wrote it about the incident between Armenian community and Russian community when Russians accused Armenians as the ones who came to Russia, to Russian land, and they were acting up, doing something which they were not supposed to do, and saying at this time that you are the guests. So how can you who colonized this land along with Armenians? Armenians didn't colonize, but they ended up in this land. You are both on the same status. How can you say that? And the point of my article was that those people, and it was officials who stated that point, that Armenian community is the guests, and we Russians are the masters of the land. It's not the case. It's not the case. They shouldn't say that. This land belonged to Circassian, and Circassians are the ones who suffered the genocide. So that was my point of view. Some people may not share it, but we insist on this.
Thank you.
Opinion.
Thank you for that. Now, speaking of the diaspora, I mean, we know there is a Circassian diaspora and there is an Armenian diaspora. How can we survive the threats of assimilation in the current imperial conditions? What does the Circassian leadership do, and how do you handle assimilation in the diaspora as well as in Circassia? Because we know when you live under the foreign rule, you become part of that system, and that changes your language, your mentality. How do you keep your national identity from mixing and perishing? Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to comment on that, only because I was enlightened recently from Professor Chen on a project. So, national scale, across the 50 countries, there is no project. We have CASAs, which are considered organizations that when they originally were built, were to discuss how to return home, how we can mobilize to return home to Circassia. But they've been, over time, changing their goals, and now it's more of a social club / gathering place. So there is no mechanisms put in place, but there is a couple of projects, we can say, that are starting. We're seeing in Turkey now, they've created the first Circassian school. In the last 150 years, we have not had that in Turkey. The first one was created about 2 months ago in the Circassian language. This is unheard of in Turkey. In Israel, we are very fortunate that the state of Israel has been very supportive of the Circassians, where state funds come into play to keep the language alive. State funds come into play to keep the villages where there is a very small percentage of assimilation in Israel. We are seeing now also camps created in Israel for Circassians in Turkey and Jordan to come to Israel to meet their Circassian brothers and sisters and to stay together and not assimilate through programs, language programs, cultural programs, communication to stay in touch. So this is very new to us on this. Why? Assimilation was not a factor for Circassians until about 20 years ago. Up until 20 years ago, when a Circassian married a non-Circassian, it was unheard of. Now we are at a very high percentage of assimilation. We are seeing numbers of 50, 60% in countries such as Jordan, Syria, America, Turkey. So in 5 generations, we saw a very good society, or the society itself protected itself. However, at this time, it's almost impossible under the current circumstances with assimilation. This is a very big challenge for us.
The only chance for nation to survive and preserve as self-sustainable, independent nation, and not to be part of another bigger nation, or not to get assimilated, is having own sovereignty, sovereign statehood. Without that, any people, any nation in the globalistic world have no chance to survive and preserve their culture and language and their basic national character.
Armenia will survive because of the state of Armenia. Circassia cannot survive without Circassia.
Yeah, for us, it's very complicated because we are deprived of educational system. We don't have schools. All schools we have are in foreign language.
Even in the homeland, if you could point out.
I'm talking about homeland.
Yes.
Basically, I'm talking about homeland. In the homeland, we have educational system in foreign language, which is Russian. The people in the villages still practice in daily life, and diaspora language is not practiced on even basic daily level, is not practiced anymore. It's only elders who is 50 or 60 years old. Israel is a different story. It's very small fragmentation of the whole diaspora, which is 7 to 10 million. Nobody really know the exact number. Israel is about 3,000 people only, which is, or 5,000, which is nothing. The most important for us to have education in our language, not in foreign language, not in Russian language. Russian language is not our language. Our nation is big. It's only 10% in the Caucasus, and that 10% living on their ancestral land, and they have to have that opportunity to get educated in the school in the form of Circassian language, fully. If this is not presented, it means we have no future. As simple as that, because world now is getting very small, very fast. Children have no time to learn something extra. They have to focus on something which is the basic. And the form of instruction has to be in our language. We still practice it in our villages in the Caucasus, 250 villages, over 250 villages. And that right have to be given to us as a nation, and given to us even more as descendants of survivors of the genocide, the worst crime ever against the humanity. So this is the language and education issue we're facing.
May I add to this thing, please?
Yes, sure.
You finished? Sorry. Did you finish, Ali?
Yes, Adel, please continue.
Okay, I don't think it's only the language and culture which are the main important elements for preserving a nation. I think the most important is the national identity. National identity can be obtained through different different ways and means. And there are many different examples on that if the people wanted to stay or to keep their identity, even if they lose their language and their culture, they can they can restore that the time they are able to go back home or to get on the soil of their homeland. And I give you an example on this is Algiers. Algiers, after 132 years under the French colonization, they were giving them education in French, and they were prevented from using their language, even for their religion. But at the end, when they obtained their independence, Ahmed Ben Bella, which was the first Algerian president, he gave his inauguration speech in French because he didn't know Arabic. But with time, when he came back home, and all others who were not able to study their own language, which is the Arabic, they were able to keep their homeland, they were able to keep their identity, their independence, and they regained gradually their culture and language.
Thank you for that.
I would like to say in this situation one other point. Algeria is one out of number of Arabic countries. One out of number. We, I'm not sure how many, 20, 25 Arabic countries. And in other 24 countries, Arabic language wasn't in danger. So they could easily find the teachers and instructors and restore language using the resources of other brotherly Arabic nations. We don't have anything.
True.
The only thing we have is our Caucasus, that 250 villages where we can claim our right.
I would agree with you.
It means we can do that anywhere.
I would agree with you, but doesn't mean that the Circassians will not be able to maintain their identity. I'm talking about myself. I don't speak Circassian. I don't practice Circassian culture. I'm living in all over the place. Every day I go to a different country, and now I always think about the Circassian identity, about the Circassian homeland, about the Circassian home rights, human rights. So many Circassians are the same. But it's not a way of just to say things, just to be showing that I'm opposing a certain thing or certain idea. No, it's just an idea that it's very important to concentrate on the Circassian identity. The national identity is very important, and that will be save our homeland.
That is true. If I may add to it, Alijan, I'm sorry, but I would have to agree with Mr. Bashqawi because national identity is something that is what's keeping, for example, many Armenians who came to the United States generations ago, and they are still feeling the Armenian spirit inside them. They're still concerned about the Armenian issues, even though they may not even be able to speak Armenian or even their names are American, but they still continue to be Armenians because of the national identity that they feel that they belong to that national identity. And I think it's a valid point. Of course, the language and the culture are important, but the national identity is what is keeping the nation alive. I don't know, what would you say about it, Ali?
But at the same point, state Armenians have their national or internationally recognized statehood where nobody preventing them maintaining their culture. It's small. It's a fracture of a real historic Armenia, but it's still, we don't have even that small part. And this is very crucial for us to have something in order to feed that identity, which would later spread all over the diasporas. Because right now, identity is lacking in the motherland. Imagine you have people in Armenia who don't know how to speak Armenian language. That's the situation what we are facing.
Well,
we have Cherkess people, Circassian people who don't know how to speak ancestral land, never ever left the motherland. Imagine, do you know anybody Armenian who were born in Armenia, raised up in Armenia all his life, and don't know how to speak Armenian?
Yes, I actually do, unfortunately. I would say a certain group of Armenian individuals who have the Russian education, who prefer to speak Russian, thinking that Russian is a higher level language in Armenia, in Russia, and even in the United States. I see a lot of Armenians who speak Russian, and it's bizarre, it's absurd, but it is the reality. And basically, speaking of the Armenia being an independent or a sovereign country, which Circassia is not. As you know, we suffered a lot in order to gain our independence from when the Soviet Union fell apart, but they were still trying to keep their power in the region, and they still are. That's how the Nagorno-Karabakh or the Artsakh war started, is because they wanted to punish the Armenians with the hands of the Azerbaijan Republic's Turkish population. And so we had to fight for our independence. It wasn't just given to us, even though the Soviet Union fell apart, but we had to struggle for it. And we still are struggling for it. So, which brings up to my previous question, which I asked you, Ali. You are a part of a special project for the Geopolitical Club, which is to organize a collective security for the different nations of the Caucasus. And so would you like to discuss about the process or the status of what's taking place, if anything is being done about it, or I mean, just a little bit about it? I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to hear that.
Yes, the idea is to establish some sort of, initially it will be a group of people consisting of individuals of different ethnicities, ethnic groups of the Caucasus. You know, a lot of problems. In the Caucasus, we have a lot of problems between Azeri and Armenians, between Georgians and Osset people, Abkhaz and Georgians, Osset and Ingush, Lak and Chechen. It's so many confrontations and frictions and antagonism between all these nations. So the idea was to make some sort of a group people, a prototype of the future. I would say that, maybe it's too early, but I will say that. Prototype of the future council, or call it parliament, or call it, it's not clear yet. Mm-hmm. In order to generate some sort of solutions in different situations, you know, or at least consulting group or council, in order to observe, analyze, and understand the problems between different nationalities and republics. The roots, who created that situation? As for me, it's quite clear. it's a politics divide and rule. It's clear for many people, but that many people can't get together. That's the most interesting thing, because I meet a lot of people and we share the same comprehension, but still nobody really wants to take steps towards generating something. So the idea was like that, to establish some sort of group for the future, and hopefully it will grow, and to invite not only Armenians, but I advise to our friends, we need to have also Azeri people. For us, Adia people, we don't have confrontation with anybody so far. Hopefully, we're not going to have. But I know that there is some sort of friction between us and Karachai people. Unfortunately, we have to admit that, and that would be great to avoid further aggravation in the Caucasus, to have people together discuss problems. Why this happens? Why we have to? We shouldn't just sit and wait and look and wait what's going to happen, and then after everything happens and it's too late to correct things, to do how to get out of this situation, a bloodbath situation, most of the cases, like what happened between so many people in the Caucasus.
No, I think you're with that point you just made. This is a very important point, is these discussions have to be made across all people, without the key player, Russia, playing us against each other. So having these discussions, maybe the next time we can invite somebody from the Karachais, a leader from that group. We can invite from other ethnic groups.
Georgians, Asset, Abkhazians, very important. We will have, sooner or later, we will have our region free, or comparatively, if we compare it from situation right now, it's not, I don't think it will be fully free of any sort of Russian interference, but I want to hope it will be better, and we will have to establish some sort of union between all these independent countries and territories. So far we have Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and others are coming. A lot of people in Russia now openly discussing how Russia is needed to get rid of Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia. So far they're talking about these three. But these three is not going to be the only. It's all the Caucasus will become independent, and we people of the Caucasus have to think how to coexist and live peacefully and work together and be part of civilized world.
Yeah. And you can add, Ali,
Western world.
Yeah, and you can add to what you just said, that sphere of the Caucasus. Let's look at Crimea. Crimea is on the border of Circassia. It's a neighbor of Circassia. We have historical ties to the Crimeans. So their plight right now with the Russians currently is we should be working with them as well in discussing how to survive.
Zach, you're not in the picture, I'm sorry.
Yes,
we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Yeah, I just stepped away for a couple of seconds to give Ali and Chen their faces are much better than mine. But there is that need with them as our neighbor of this discussion. We cannot discuss only isolated nations throughout the Caucasus. We cannot say Circassia only, Georgia only, Armenia only, because of the complexity, because of the shared histories, because of the shared suffering, because of the shared conditions. We have to find solutions for each other to balance within the Caucasus.
Thank you. Ali, just to clarify, I mean, you mentioned Azeri people, Azerbaijan, well, there is no such thing as Azeri people. There are Turks who are citizens of the Azerbaijan Republic. There are Lezgins, there are Tatars, there are Talish, Avars, Tats, Khazars. And so naming Azerbaijani, there is no such thing. I mean, you should agree, not only Armenians have an issue with the Turks of the Azerbaijan Republic, but also the Lezgins, the Talish, the Avars, because they're pushing everybody. And so how do you see them being involved into this project when they are a problem for several of us, not only the Armenians?
Of course, Lezgi and Talish and other group have to be presented. The whole idea is not. I can't name all the ethnicities, but it's so many. Dagestan alone is about 30 different ethnic groups. Some of them related, some of them not. The idea is to build up some sort of group which will aspire to work out something constructive, something objective, something positive, to prevent obstacles and prevent aggravation of the problems, possible problems in the future. If it will work, good. If it won't work, we will try to do something else. That was the idea, and we actually tried to do that, and we're doing something towards that.
Appreciate
but
it.
It's not that easy.
I'll give you an example. You asked earlier about what our opinion are of Iran and how the Trans-Caucasus will be used by the superpowers. So again, we are seeing today the exploitation of the people of the Caucasus by Russia, specifically Russia. Not only is it the trade between Iran and Europe, we are now seeing all the oil companies right off the coast of Circassia drilling for oil. That can be the next deposit of oil riches that can be for the people of the Caucasus instead of the people of Moscow. So we're seeing exploitation of us continuing till today. So they got rid of the people, now they're exploiting the land, and they are keeping the people away from the land to prosper on their own homeland with this exploitation.
Thank you. Now, my last question, if you don't mind, if there was one thing that you would want to say to the people watching us, what would that one thing be? What would be your message on the eve of the Circassian genocide? Anyone?
People, for Circassians, they have to stay together and they have to know what they want. They have to know their national identity. They have to keep their culture and language as much as they can, but that needs some time and efforts. And we have to work. We have to continue on awareness for our people and for the world, to show the world what has happened with us, with our nation, and how it can be solved. Also, it is possible that we could go to Europe, to other countries, or to the civilized world in particular, to try to find out how we can get along with our problems and how can we solve them.
Thank you. Ali?
Basically, I would share what Adel said. I would join I would agree with what he said, and this is very sad day. We have to just try to remember
The souls that were lost.
The souls,
The human-
lost, the people, the
The human tragedy for our people and for your people, where we can make prayers for them for the past and prayer for the future of more prosperous, where it does not occur again. This is our concern. We are seeing signs of possible heated situations in the near future in the Caucasus that we do not want.
True. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining our program and for making this happen. I want to thank Arman, who has been patiently helping us with technology to make this possible. And so please accept our condolences and our solidarity on behalf of the Armenian people to our Circassian brothers and sisters. And thank you so much for this opportunity to make this educational program to educate the masses about the Circassian genocide and the concerns that the Circassian people have currently and possibly in the future.
Thank you
for your
bringing a voice to the
gesture. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Take care. Thank you.